But now it's my honor to introduce Jerry Heiman. Jerry is a graduate of Albion College, the University of Michigan Dental School, and the University of Michigan Hospital Residency Program. He served in the U.S. Army Dental Corps from 1966 to 1969, and he practiced oral and maxillofacial, did I pronounce that right? Surgery in Midland. And he's been a big Platte Lake property owner since 1977. And he became a full-time Benzie resident in 1998. That short history here, though, Jerry, as far as I'm concerned, is a native. I know he wasn't born at Paul Oliver or at Markham Hospital, but his level of passion and knowledge of our area really is that of a native. He gives a lot of his time to our community. He serves on the Platte Lake Improvement Association Board of Directors, on the advocacy committees for Benzie EMS and Benzie Bus, the River Care Committee of the Conservation Resource Alliance, and he also delivers meals for Benzie Senior Resources. And that doesn't even touch on what he does for the Historical Society. He joined our board in 2007, and he served as secretary from 2014 to 2021. He's a member of the Buildings and Grounds, and I'll say an active member of these committees. He just doesn't attend meetings, he does work. Buildings and Grounds programs, executive, and community outreach. He's a tour director for museum and historical walking, bicycle, and bus tours. And he still finds a lot of time to give to his family. Jerry's just an all-around great guy, and I'm really proud to introduce him.
My stage prop. What is this? Very good. Yes, this is a smelt net. Not only that, this is my smelt net. Just to demonstrate, I know something whereof I speak. I love to tell stories, and this was a story that I had to dig into. As some of you of a certain age here in the audience may know a little bit about. However, I will try and keep my stories succinct, because Susie said if I go over an hour, she's getting up, saying foul, and leaving. So I will try to make concise. That's why I actually made notes. And if I could make all these things work at once, we'll get by. Just a note, I'm sure most all of you, wherever you lived, went smelt dipping or knew about it. They were everywhere, all over the Great Lakes, every little creek that emptied into the Great Lakes. And it was not really about getting the food, it was about the good time. And, when I lived in Midland, you went up along the shore of Saginaw Bay with 1,000 of your closest friends. And if you lived in the Detroit area, you went down to Point Pelee, southwestern Michigan, over to South Haven. And if you lived in this area, you homed in on that little bitty creek in Beulah, which was filled in April with more fish than water. And we'll get into the history of that some. But there's a story told in our family that when I was a wee little infant, and my parents and aunt and uncle would go over to South Haven, and they'd warm my baby bottle on the manifold of the car while going smelt dipping. So it's been in the family a long time. My kids even got to do some of it. Sadly, my net is now a historic useless artifact. So I gave it to the museum, because other than in Crystal Lake, there's a sort of a fishery, but the Great Lakes smelt fishery is pretty well gone. We could have a discussion on the reasons. I have my theories later. So about our story here in Beulah, it was, if I can, there. So what would make this beautiful, tranquil stream, cue the bird songs and the music, turn into this. Every man for himself. It was a wild scene. Ned just told me the story he heard of some guy that had a big oversized pair of waders. So he just lay down in the stream, open up the waders. I attribute this to Ned. I have no personal knowledge. And let the fish fill the waders. And then they'd take him up to the truck and lay him in the back of the truck and take his pants off and empty out all the smelt. So there were many techniques in use. There were potato sacks, nets. In a crowded situation like that, a long-handled net like this might be a little disadvantage and would injure a lot of people. But everyone seemed to take it very well, despite the mayhem. There weren't fights like there would be today. So what would cause this? This little guy, wherever he is, there, right there. That's the cause of all that. What is that? That's Osmerus mordax. What a dignified name for a little bitty creature. Roll that around on your tongue. Osmerus mordax. Tastes almost as good as the fish itself. They weren't native. They're saltwater. The Atlantic Rainbow Smelt was a saltwater fish from the East Coast, but they were in some of the landlocked lakes of New England. And in 1912, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service decided to do an experiment, and they brought 16,400,000 fertilized eggs to Crystal Lake. I don't know who counted them, but someone did, and dumped them in the lake as thinking they would hatch and become food for the lake trout and would then propagate and become more food. They tried 8 million in Torch Lake. That one failed, never took. But the ones in Crystal Lake did. But the thing is, after they put them there, they didn't really tell many people. They just did their job, went away. No one thought anything about it. It was completely forgotten until one night in 1918, Newt Ely, the county clerk, went down the hill to fetch a pail of water for his wife's wash tub. And he came back and she said, "Damn, Newt, the whole thing's full of fish. You know, where's the water?" Well, he thought, how could this be? So he went down, he looked, shined his light, and couldn't see the bottom of the creek. It was just full of smelt. This is early April. So he spreads the word around the town. Everyone comes and looks and starts paying attention. They don't know what they are, but they're there. And so some guy said, "Well, I remember seeing those as far back as about 1914 coming in there in the spring, but never paid any attention to it." Well, as the word spread, of course, the first thing that thought process of the local Benzie County hardworking people had really good fertilizer. So the farmers pulled up and loaded their wagons and hauled the smelt population away for their fields. Somewhere along about early 1920s, someone discovered that you could actually eat them, that they tasted pretty good. So how many of you have eaten smelt? How many didn't like it? See, there's a few, but most everyone loves smelt. How many have gone smelt dipping? How many with alcohol involved? So anyway, the farmers were hauling them away, and they the frenzy that caused is kind of summed up by a guy, James Swan, an ESPN outdoor writer, that called it a contagion. When crowds of people come together, contagion occurs. People's emotions take over and a group mentality starts to emerge. You can see this at a football game or a musical concert. The same thing can happen in hunting or fishing. The most extreme mob fishing experience I've been in was smelt dipping in Beulah several decades ago. I don't know if it's
I've
still
got some
like
here.
this, but it used to be that the small stream that comes out of Crystal Lake where you dip is roped off when you arrive. The dipping does not start until 11 p.m. An eager crowd of dippers with nets, pails, and crowds in the darkness behind the line. Suddenly the line is dropped and lights come on. People rush forward about 50 yards and plunge into the stream,
Oh, you guys can, yeah.
maybe a foot deep.
Gaping hole in it.
There are so many people getting into the stream, the water level rises almost a foot. People start swinging nets at the dark clouds of smelt that are trying to spawn. People slip and fall in. I remember one guy who dumped his net full of smelt into another guy's hip boots instead of his pail. That's a contagion. New word I learned. Where do I want to go with this? So the first record I found in the newspapers of this was in 1922. And when they decided they should find out what they were, so they sent some of them to the professors at professor at Eastern Michigan, and so it came back that it was Atlantic Smelt, and they didn't quite know what to make of it as far as if this invasive, see, the problem isn't a new problem, was going to be a blessing or a curse, because they might just fill up the cold creek and drive out the brook trout. They might harm the perch population in the lake. So they were keeping a close watch on it. And 23, they're still studying it, but at least they knew what they were now. And about this time, people started discovering they were good to eat. And all the locals came to the stream to actually dip loads of them for themselves and not just for fertilizer. But it was kind of a wild melee. In 1925, the village council decided that it was a little too chaotic and people were getting more than their share and other people weren't getting any. They thought they'd turn the whole thing over to the conservation department, and Mark Craw, who was the local officer from Traverse City, was brought out to set rules and be in charge with his deputies. Now you see it's all the way up to 4 tons of smelt. They thought that was really something, but that ain't nothing, as you'll see later on. This was taken back in the early days. They put a screen across the mouth and a screen at the Clark Street Bridge. So all the smelt could not go anywhere. They were trapped in that stretch. And when they turned the lights on at night and everyone had their chance to dip, they'd clean out every smelt in the creek because they couldn't go anywhere. So then they'd raise the screen at the mouth, let a new batch in, fill the stream again, and have another dip at 4 in the morning. And never thinking that not only are they taking out every smelt in the creek, not letting them go any further up to spawn, but all the ones that dropped eggs there are all getting trampled by all the boots. So this becomes a factor later on. I wonder why I can't make this thing advance easily. So this is 1906. The deputies are controlling the dipping, and the deputies are dipping too for people that didn't get any. You could line up like the people in the last picture with your bucket, and the deputy would dip out a bunch and put it in your bucket. So if you weren't successful, you'd get some anyway. And this is now it's starting to get advertised. You see that? Grand Rapids Press. Word is spreading. (1927) was a big year. That was when the governor came. And Fred Green was a real outdoor hunter, fisherman kind of guy, was governor. Had a friend that had a place on Platte Lake. So he'd come up for 2 or 3 days beforehand and go smelt dipping and then recreate play poker during the day. And in 1927, of course, the city fathers got on the phone, called the governor's office and said it started. And so the entourage got in a couple of their help mobiles and drove north, and they got telephone reports along the way from observers. And they'd say when they got to Bear Lake, everyone rushed to the Mills house right here and prepared a lavish banquet for the governor and his party. And then food, and not drink, but food was served and speeches were made. And then it was time to go down to the creek and go smelt dippings. And they said, do you want us to rope off a section for you, Sir Governor? You know, oh, no, I'll get in there with my constituents. And he did. He got right in the creek and swung a net with everyone else and enjoyed it so much he came back the 2 years after that. I don't know if it was for the banquet or for the smelt. This was 27 when the governor was here. And of course, they got all the films. God, I wish I could get a hold of those films. And there's Governor Green. And now we're up to 20 tons taken. Still doesn't hold a candle to what it became. But there's the governor in there dipping away with all his constituents. One way to get votes. And then this was 1927. They had, you could go to the Garden Theater and see moving pictures of the Smelt Run and the crowds from Path. Remember RKO Path and the movie theaters? There was Movie Tone and RKO Path, News of the World with Lowell Thomas. Well, they were here filming. And this was a typical crowd scene, waiting for word when the lights would come on, and you got to rush the creek and get your half hour of dipping before they turned the lights out, and so they could refill the creek with fish. And I had a note for that slide. Hang on a second. It was yeah, this one. There's something universal about smelt dipping. Old and young rub shoulders. The rich and well-known stand together with those less fortunate. And men of every creed can be seen in an attempt to secure one thing, smelt. Few things bring people of all classes and stations of life together like this. So that's why the governor was here. So after 1927, there was a crisis. And the crisis was some idiot in Lansing, I guess. Oh, wait a minute. Time for poetry. It's a highbrow poetry hour. I'm going to read this just to add more class to our presentation. The Run of the Smelt. In Beulah, we are awaiting the day when thousands of people will come this way to view that sight that is sure as fate, but none are able to name the date. Soon between the eve and dawning, the smelt will start their yearly spawning. And if you doubt its being a sight, just be there on the opening night. Millions of them come up the stream and can be seen as soon as the gleam from the lights that are hanging overhead shall shine direct on the iron bed. If you are early and get in line and wait the hour of 9:30, the word will be given to those around, and into the water you go with a bound. The fish are many, the men are too, and if you're lucky, you may get a few. Now, even if you've come for many a mile, you sure will say 'twas worth your while. I mean, that's That's Pulitzer Prize quality right there. I can't tell you who the author was. So yeah, there was a lot of powerful prose. Anyway, 1928, what happened was, and I don't know why this was, but someone in Lansing determined that only the conservation officers would dip smelt. Maybe it was getting a little too chaotic in the stream, and would pass them out to everyone. So instead of getting in there and dipping your smelt, you'd line up with your bucket and they'd dip some and give them to you. Well, the businessmen got wind of that and went nuts, and all the people that came from far away, which were the money coming to town, wrote and said, well, we're not coming under those conditions. So 4 of the town fathers got in their car. There was Dr. Willard, I know who he was, and Bennett, probably the funeral guy, and one of the Rogers, and a Warren, and Mr. Evans drove to Lansing immediately in their flying cloud and to see the director. But he wasn't in. So the office said to contact Mr. Titus in Traverse City, the district director, and take their case to him. So they phoned back to Beulah, and 4 other guys jumped in their car and took off in a snowstorm for Traverse City. And that was Mr. Oxley, the hardware guy, Heron, Rockwell, the justice of the peace, and Mr. Johnson. 3 hours it took to get to Traverse City through the snowstorm just to find Mr. Titus to reverse the ruling. And he did. And so the ban was lifted, and they said, okay, you can have 1 dipping at midnight, and the early morning dipping will be officers only, and they'll distribute them to people. So it was a compromise. And so that's when this headline came out that, okay, we got the order changed. And this is what I was talking about, of the people, the early morning dip, when people would line up and the conservation officer there would dump a net full in your pail, and then the line would move on to the next guy. And Governor Green came back again, 1929. Inquirers report. This is how people found out. You see, there's no set date. You couldn't plan on when you were going to come, because there was a great big blackboard at the Sells Hotel lobby that had all the year's dates of beginning, and it varied all over from late March to early April. So they couldn't set an exact date. So the Jungle Telegraph had to tell all the out-of-town people around the country when to come. And so if you lived here, you had a lot of friends that were counting on you to phone them. And of course, the Chamber of Commerce made sure as many people knew as possible. They sent word to all the newspapers in Michigan, who would then print articles. Radio stations as far as Chicago, they'd send notices to them, and they'd broadcast that the run was on. And all the hotels, of course, were just packed, people sleeping on the floor. And, you know, can you just picture 5,000 people on one night in Beulah wandering the streets at 2 in the morning and no bars? So it was prohibition. I don't know what they did. Then what else do I have here? So the word got out by many different means. Eventually, Western Union came and set up a telegraph operator in the lobby of the Beulah Inn to you could get on the list to receive telegrams. And then, of course, all the newspapers got the word by telegram from this operator that got stationed there. This one, I have to read this was good. 1929, after it was over, it says, "The shouting and the tumult dies. The heralded event has come and all but gone. Beulah becomes once more only an attractive resort village located on US 31, with its inhabitants returning again to the Republican promised land of normalcy." There were no Democrats here then, and certainly not the newspaper either. For one fast week, the village has lived the life, run the race, played the host, and now is emerging sleepy-eyed but triumphant from its great annual Smelt Run. Now, they decided they needed a little help to keep order. So the state police posted Manistee volunteered that 17 policemen to come every year and help patrol the town and keep traffic from completely blocking the street. And so this was the Beulah Smelt Patrol of the state police. They came every year for a long time. And so if you had a good wife, you could be in the stream dipping, and your good wife would be right there with the wash tub on the shore, receiving whatever you could dip out of the stream. Now, eventually they did have ladies' nights and even children's nights where, you know, the men had to reverse the process and hold the wash tub for the good wife. So I'm going to talk a little, what's the most important part of the story is what Beulah did through the businessmen's club that's called the Commercial Club then, the village council, which made the rules, in cooperation with the DNR. But the DNR pretty much every year set the rules as the village council wanted them. And they were pretty cooperative. But what they did in the 30s when it really reached its peak was quite amazing to the feats that the Businessmen's Association did, which, you know, the forerunner to the Beulah boosters. So I know Vicky's here and she does a lot, but she can't hold a candle to what these guys did. We had, you know, they had the newspapers and the radio, and they got politicians and celebrities to come and hit the button to switch the lights on for the first night. One year they had the warden of the Ionia Reformatory. I thought that's pretty good, big time celebrity to get. And eventually they actually rigged up a switch. Western Union did it for free. And in the governor's office in Lansing, because the current governor wasn't like Governor Green, he wasn't coming up and getting wet. So he could actually punch the button and turn the lights on from his office in Lansing. This was, I think this was a Time magazine article in 1938. They had 1930 and 1938. There were Time magazine, all the other big magazines, National Geographic, outdoor magazines publicized it because it was so unusual to have that much of a bounty in such a small area when everyone diving in after it was like a national phenomenon. This was a promotional thing that the town put out in the 40s. They went to all kinds of things. Here's a box of smelt sent to the Detroit police chief who was at a convention at the Park Place. And on the left there is Eddie Applehoff. A lot of you knew his son, Alan, big developer of the North Shore of Crystal Lake. Eddie was a big Beulah booster then. And Andrew Johnson, they're from the Businessmen's Club. And they all went all the way to the top. 4 guys, and we'll get to this later. I think 1939, these 4 guys, Boyd King, Arthur Finch, Justice Smith of the Fox Farm, and Leon Rockwell, the Justice of the Peace, got in 2 cars with 1 ton of smelt and drove to Washington, D.C. with the intent of feeding smelt to all the Congress and to promote the only true smelt, the Beulah Crystal Lake smelt. So there's a picture of them trying to feed some to Cactus Jack Garner, the vice president in 1939. The sign that you can't see talks about home of the smelt. This is the state police's duty to keep anyone from breaking into fights or taking to, if you were really got your tub full, they'd tell you to get out of the stream and let someone else in. I think this is just below Clark Street, I think. And here's the sign, home of the smelt, come in winter, catch the famous Crystal Lake smelt through the ice, fish shanties and equipment furnished to visitors at reasonable charge. We're going to get to that, how it played into things. Here's right on the corner, I'll show you the next picture where that was, but this was the welcome to Beulah, home of the smelt, winter fishing, and that was right on the corner where the road goes down into town off of 31. So back to the years of smelt dipping. In 1930 comes along, and they started getting a little entertainment for the people walking the streets. They had high school band, Benzonia High School German band. They honor town band. They played on Main Street. They had a loudspeaker car that would go up and down the street playing music and announcements. They had all the restaurants, of course, and the stores and the hotels stayed open all night. And it said the barber shops on 24-hour shifts. Why would the barber shops be open all night? Anyway, they were. And then that was the first year they got the state police to come and help out. And then there's some notes that they made that year after the dipping. Proof, the runs early this week were vivid reminders of the good old days when smelt couldn't be given away. Proof of this is the statement of a local hardware dealer Wednesday who said dippers came Tuesday night more or less unprepared for the large catches. As a result, he did a thriving business of wash tubs, dish pans, almost every other sort of a container that would hold smelt. So it's interesting to hear the remarks of visitors after Tuesday night's run. So we've been to other smelt runs the past few days, but none of them matched Beulah. Give me the Beulah run. And then I like this one. There's no getting around the fact that the greatest feature and ace in the hole of the Beulah Smelt Cold Creek Run is the thrill of plunging into the creek and mixing it with the mob. It's competition of the keenest sort, and there's no true sportsman who doesn't relish competition. And then this one, speaking of business sales, another merchant sold 6 pairs of long underwear and a similar number of overalls to drenched dippers who slipped in the creek Tuesday night. Now we're up to 1931, the big happening. The state police got here. Sometime between the Wednesday evening and the Thursday morning smelt dip, state police officers made a raid on a couple of the local business places, found 5 or 6 illegal slot machines doing a brisk business. The machines with all their contents were confiscated by the police. Now we know what they were doing between those 2 smelt dippings. Since there weren't any bars open, someone set up some slot machines. Okay, we get up to the 1930, 31. Now we're going to get into the, this depression is starting, and it's not a matter of just having fun dipping some smelt. Cash was short People needed food. They found ways to pickle them so they'd last a long time. And it became an important business. Also about this time, people discovered that they could catch them all winter out on the lake, and they came up with techniques that are still in use today to catch smelt through the ice. And of course, that's a longer season than 10 days of frantic dipping. And so the amount you could store up was more, and the amount you could sell. It became a commercial operation for people that didn't have any cash. You could catch an excess, put them on ice, and ship them on the train on ice to the hotels and restaurants downstate. And only the finest restaurants served Beulah Smelt, Crystal Lake Smelt. They were advertised that way. The smelt in Lake Michigan, which all came originally from Crystal Lake, were just poorer quality. And they were sold in supermarkets in the East Coast and all, but they weren't up the same. So where are we here? This is in the early 30s. You could, I mean, this was when this time of year the papers were full of nothing else. That was the headlines. So the annual big event, 1932. I gotta read this. It's like watching for a gigantic bomb to explode. The fuse is ignited, and any minute the spark that throws all Michigan into a rushing turmoil may reach the heart of the bomb, or whatever the impulse can be called, which blows the lid off and crowds Cold Creek with teeming millions of smelt. Then the deluge, many men, all kinds, all ages, and all sizes of men, rich, poor, and incumbent, all will be there. And don't forget the lively and laughing ladies. This is, I don't know who was writing for the paper then, but they were definitely taking license. Since Monday morning, a continual stream of telephone calls and telegrams have voiced the question on the lips of every Benzie resident: have they started to run yet? And we have one more poem, just to add more class. 7 o'clock in Beulah, Michigan, town with a future because of the fish. Fish by the millions, fish by the ton. Army of fishermen set for the run. Time for the rush is fast drawing near. Line by the creek, row upon tier, anxiously awaiting the start of the run, shivering, surging, awaiting the gun. Here is a dude with boots on his feet, a net in his hand, a costume all neat. There is a native with hair on his chin, with rubbers and socks, all set to jump in. Natives and sportsmen are in the same class, all in a bunch and one of the mass, ready to rush for the poor little smelt with numerous hearts and pity unfelt. They run for the stream at the sound of the gun. But ahead of the crowd, a sprinter has run. He reaches the creek and slackens his pace, and stubbing his toe, he lands on his face. With water and smelt and men on his frame, he crawls to the bank, despondent with shame. While thousands of smelt are netted and dipped, and the next generation is royally gypped. Another prize winner. So now we get to somewhere. What am I doing wrong with this? So about this time, they started a ladies' night. And here you see the lively, laughing ladies in the creek. But the most interesting thing, what in God's name is that thing up in the top right corner? Right there. I swear to God, it's a muskrat. And He's just sitting there watching them. Like, did they evict him from his bankside hole or what? But I've never seen a muskrat quite that tame around people. So I don't know anything about this picture. It was in our files, but that's the picture. Where do I point this? Over here? That's not work. Oh, all right. So I'm going to get into 1937, another big watershed year. They were starting to worry. The runs were getting smaller and they thought they should do something. So the Conservation Department at first said, okay, we're only going to allow dipping during the day. No more of the night frantic dips when it's full of smelt. There are not so many in there during the day. But again, the town council and the businessmen club got all excited and they said, no, you can't do that. So they compromised and said, okay, then we'll allow one dipping at midnight. So they did. And also at that time, and this is still depression and people are looking for food, there starts to be a little competition between the ice fishermen and the spring smelt dipping. And this editorial was in the paper then, a smelt problem. With the approach of the annual run at Beulah, the question regarding the advisability of curtailing the dipping or calling off the celebration entirely is again being discussed with considerable interest. The discussion is timely and should be pursued to a definite conclusion at once. The arguments for and against the Smelt Run are well known, probably need but brief mention. The annual celebration brings thousands of visitors to Beulah, results in many hundreds of extra dollars being spent here. It's brought Beulah more nationwide publicity than any other one thing. But of late years, the run has not been a complete success. On a number of occasions, crowds have gathered in Beulah, many from hundreds of miles away, only to find but a few scattering fish in Cold Creek when the lights were flashed on. The reaction of visitors has been directly unfavorable. And meanwhile, the winter fishing through the ice on Crystal Lake, extending over 2 months or more, has grown into a recreational industry that rivals, if doesn't overshadow, the spring run as a source of income and favorable publicity. Thousands of pounds of smelt are shipped to downstate markets. Hundreds of fishing shanties from all over the state visit the village weekly. And it goes on to talk about what should be done about regulations. It's regrettable that the arguments concerning the smelt run have developed into a choice between the abandoning of either the run or the winter fishing. The contention is often heard that the wholesale dipping of smelt in the run and destruction of the spawn under the trampling boots is gradually putting the fish out of existence. Exactly the same charge is made against the winter fishing. The obvious conclusion that there are no longer enough smelt in Crystal Lake to meet both demands, therefore one or the other must be stopped. And so they came up with a compromise thing for that year. There'd be only one dipping a night. And of course, then what happens? Now, when I talk about ice fishing shanties, these weren't shanties. These were palaces. And there were several people in Beulah that made good money making these things, as many as they could make, and renting them out. And the weekend crowds would pour into town and rent a shanty. You could get groceries. Boyd King would bring groceries out to the shanties. You could get the newspaper delivered. There was a taxi service to take you out and back. And you could spend all day and night there because some of them had easy chairs, day beds, a stove. You know, it was kind of like the fabled Minnesota things. So it was really a big industry. So what happens after they do that? A record run. The fish that they thought were disappearing, all records are broken. The number of fish taken the first 3 days. One of the biggest smelt runs we've seen in Beulah in the last 10 years. So you cannot fool with Mother Nature. You don't know what's going to happen. Now we get to the last little segment, the entertainment portion. God, we don't have one picture of the Main Street Beulah celebrations. It was routinely, they counted 1,300 cars in downtown Beulah trying to find a place to park. 5,000 or 6,000 people. You know, and so they decided, well, we'll start having entertainment for them. By the way, I forgot to mention, I did the all-time records, 1934, they estimated 50 tons of smelt taken during the spring dipping over the 10-day period. There was one time they thought 10 tons were dipped in 15 minutes. Yeah, in 1934, 50 tons taken in a 10-day season by 11,000 people, 15 tons in 10 minutes. 1935, live broadcast by WJR, the Goodwill station in Detroit. And so there was a committee of the Beulah businessmen just to plan the festival. And it got bigger and bigger. Started out simple, couple bands, speaker car, and then they kept adding things. And they get outside entertainment, which was kind of hard to do because you couldn't tell them when they were going to be booked because you didn't know when the smelt run. Other towns had festivals, Boyne City, East Jordan, on a set date. But Beulah was not going to have a festival if the smelt weren't running. So it was like a mushroom festival, you know, they have set dates. You don't know if there's going to be mushrooms or not. But so they kept it flexible, and they did manage to get some big time entertainment to come. The where am I here? So they started ramping up the entertainment. The American Legion Post had every year would have a couple of the vacant buildings in Beulah cleaned out for dancing and games. They had a lot of corn games with groceries as prizes. I have no idea what corn games were, but that's what they advertised. And they'd give away smelt as well as lake trout and whitefish if they happened to have caught some. Witness the revival of the Gold Rush days, Michigan's greatest sporting event. So there you go. And they had a king and queen every year. You'll notice this year it was Lester Dealey, well-known Detroit business counselor, and his wife. And what I really like is the king actually has a little smelt on top of his crown here. I thought that was a nice touch that they added. The queen didn't get a smelt on her crown. In 1941, I think it was, Marion Call was the smelt queen, a name that probably some of you might know. And here's, you could, Fairs Cafe in downtown Beulah. I'm sure a lot of you remember. You know, I don't, but some of you wouldn't. Smelt our specialty. And not only that, here's the secret recipe for Peggy Fair's smelt. So again, they got governor turning on the opening night lights. They got the final big story was the Great Escanaba Smelt War. Escanaba had pretty good smelt dipping too. You remember, these all originally came from Beulah. Crystal Lake, went over the outlet, out to Lake Michigan and spread all over the Great Lakes through the years. It all came from Crystal Lake. So there were a lot of little streams around Escanaba. They had a big festival, had big promotion, trying to promote it. And they decided that they were going to do the Washington trick again. And they had Representative Bradley was from that district. So he planned on shipping a ton of smelt to Washington and putting on a dinner for all the Congress. So it received a lot of coverage in Washington and the Eastern papers about the quality of the Escanaba versus the Beulah smelt. Representative Engel of this district heard about it and denounced Escanaba smelt as underfed whitefish. So 4 men from Beulah took a ton on ice to Washington in 2 autos. You saw the picture, gave to all the politicians to demonstrate the superior taste of the only true smelt, that from Crystal Lake. Senator Elmer Thomas from Oklahoma, I don't know what dog he had in that fight, but he said he'd come to Beulah to see with his own eyes what he'd heard in Washington about Beulah smelt being superior in every way to other so-called smelt. I find no record that he actually came. So that was the Escanaba Smelt War. And then you saw that picture. Eventually, you know, that's getting ahead of myself, but just a couple entries. They had big acts that came. There was Glenn Fry and the 4 small fries from Kalamazoo. There were 3 accordions and a couple horns involved. They had the Shiawassee County Rural Serenaders one year, and they all clown bands, and they had it all. What they hit on having amateur night in 1939, which was very popular. And I don't believe this, but it said there were 25 entries, very popular. Prize for vocal to Bobby Beidler. Could he have been a kid at that time? Is he that old? And the reason I say it must have been Bob is because the dance prize went to Billy Beidler, which I know would be true. So I don't think Bob's here, but I'd like to hear his version of that story. And then eventually they made it to Ripley's Believe It or Not, when Robert Ripley said, America's ace cartoonist Robert Ripley of Believe It or Not fame, who is in Lansing this week, was sent a box of the genuine Crystal Lake smelt. The following telegram was received at the record office this morning. Thanks for the season's first run of Beulah smelt, which your governor and I divided. 841 myself, to rate them America's most delicious smelt. We'll check up on the proposition to broadcast your opening night on my return to New York Friday, Robert Ripley. I find no record that he actually broadcast the thing, but a lot of other people did. In 1950, the DNR sent their cameramen to make movies for Detroit station Channel 2. The cameraman was a young guy named Mort Neff that was working for the DNR. And then in 1949, CBS, through the Kalamazoo outlet, was going to come and record the Smelt Run for national broadcast. Let me get back to my notes here. During the war, starting in 1943, dipping was canceled. The 1942, they didn't have a festival. The run had been kind of poor. They were starting to get some rainbows in. They didn't want those dipped up. So since they had gas rationing, no one could get here anyway. They canceled the festival in 43. until 1946. There was no dipping officially. And then they had a big reopening in 1946, but no festival. They did have Paramount Newsreel come, but there was a very poor return. The village council decided no more dipping until we see some good runs. Ice fishing wasn't good either. 1949, they decided to reopen it. They'd been seeing some decent runs before, and that's when they had the CBS there. And three column front page article in the Grand Rapids Herald. And I'm going to show you this picture. I hope. There. Too far. Supposedly, according to the caption on the picture, this young kid's night shows on the left Harold Case dipping smelt. So does that look like Harold Case to anyone? Is Harold Case watching? I don't. Is he? If he's on the Zoom, he can type in a chat thing. But that supposedly is Harold Case. Then, so during the late 40s and early 50s, it sort of died a natural slow death. The runs had gotten kind of unpredictable, not great. Ice fishing did tend to keep up okay, but Beulah was not getting the massive influx of crowds, and it sort of let it die. The DNR officials and the state police quit coming, so it was up to the local sheriff's department to run it. And I think the last gasp was in 1954, a TV crew from WWTV, CBS and Cadillac came to do filming with magnesium flare lights because they didn't have the lights up overhead anymore, which, by the way, were started in 1927. The Frankfurt Lower Peninsula Power Company offered to string all those lights and pay for the power for it. And that was the illumination of the lights is what enabled this night dipping. And that was also the signal to get in or get out. And this is the result. Oh, and the thing was, the Chamber of Commerce, since they were going to film this, was afraid they wouldn't get enough people. So they put out an emergency word to everyone in the county, please come that night and dip for smelt because you're going to be on TV. So they did get a decent amount to come. And this was the filming by the magnesium flare lights of that occasion. After 1955, I can find no mention in the paper. And it apparently dipping in the creek officially ended. So were the smelt a blessing or a curse to the region? Well, they caused some destruction of private property. They probably impacted the perch fishery a little. But on the long view with what they brought to the town in the way of needed food at a time when people didn't have much and the dollars brought into the town, I'd say it was more a blessing than a curse. So does anyone have any questions you want to bring up? Yeah, 4 minutes after, Susie. Yeah, and Ned.
I heard that.
I'll repeat it.
Back in the 60s, I heard that the reason the smelt died was that they had infested the lake with lake trout, and the trout ate the smelt. Is that correct?
Well, sort of. That was the original intent of putting smelt in Crystal Lake. However, in the 80s and well, actually early 90s, after I moved here, I did a lot of night fishing on the ice with Bill Wilson. And Bill was a fanatic smelt fisherman. He'd get buckets every night and spend the rest of the night cleaning them and giving them all away. He's the only guy I knew that actually scaled smelt. And he didn't like them. He didn't eat smelt. He just did this night after night. So I went with him. And one time I saw him and he was just spitting rocks. He was so mad. And he said, the goddamn lake trout have been eating all my smelt. And I can't catch smelt anymore. Meantime, we were down by the yacht club catching lake trout through the ice like crazy. It was wonderful. It was a bonanza. And I said, Bill, remember the smelt were put in to benefit the lake trout, not the other way around. And he said, I don't care. I want my smelt back. He wrote a letter to the director of the DNR to quit putting those damn lake trout in Crystal Lake. So in answer to your question, you mess around with Mother Nature, it's a delicate balance. And there's always unintended consequences. I think the lake trout have certainly benefited from having the smelt there as food, but the smelt managed to persist. Anyone else? Yeah, Steve. Questions, are there still smelt in the lake? Yes, there are. There's probably even some in Cold Creek in the spring. A few, I think, run up the creek. People see them now and then. And there's still a winter fishery in Crystal Lake, nothing like it used to be. But there's a small number of shanties out there that still try for them. But interestingly, in the Great Lakes, which is where my smelt dipping was, they've pretty much ceased to exist. They're in Crystal Lake, Green Lake has a bunch, and in Lake Superior, apparently there's still some valid dipping. What happened in Lake Michigan and Huron? My theory, it was the zebra mussels that competed for the food supply for the young ones. That's the best theory I can think of, but there is no more smelt dipping along the shores of the lake. George? Yeah, I don't hear very well. Stand up, George. Mm-hmm.
North of downtown, and the people out on the breakwater, triangular gates.
Mm-hmm.
But one of my friends said that there's a tradition of when you catch the first smell, you bite the head off. I don't know if anybody.
Yeah, the tradition of biting the head off the first smelt you get to guarantee a good catch may help. I haven't tried it. I know people that have, usually after they have a lot of schnapps in the smelt shanty. Or as if you bitten the head off. See, did it work? Oh, I guess so. There you go. It works. This fella says it works. But there's all kinds of it. George also told me that in Wisconsin, they're called schmelts. And in Michigan, they're called smelt. The Uper accent. Yeah. I'll repeat the question. Wait a minute. What? Did the salmon fishery affect the smelt? Yeah, I mean, one more predator eating the smelt. There sure were a lot of salmon in the 60s, early 70s. I'm sure that was a factor, but I still had decent smelt dipping in the spring in the 70s. I think that was a factor, but not as much as the zebra mussels. Anyone else? All right, we're going to stop.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And a reminder to check our YouTube channel. If you missed some of the lecture, then you can rewatch it on YouTube. And our last month's lecture is online from the Ann Arbor Car Ferry. So you might want to check that out too. Thanks so much for joining us. And thanks for your support.